All right, good morning. Make sure you have out your packet, your Unit 2 representation of a line, Part 2. We're going to actually flip to our 2.3c, and where we started, or we ended up at the end on Friday, was that we were coming up with a set of points, drawing in a line, and being able to determine that slope. And then we determined that was actually an easier way to do that by going and using our formula for slope, where y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So if you'll flip to problems numbers E and F for me, we kind of ran out of time on Friday and weren't able to get those finished. So looking at these problems, I see I have no points plotted, and then I see I'm only given 1 point, so how in the world am I going to find my slope? But then I can also see that I was given that change in y over that change in x. So now we're almost working backwards. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have to plot my very first point, knowing that this is my x and this is my y. So I'm going to go ahead and plot this point. So this tells me that I'm not going to go left or right, but I am going to go down 2. So here's my very first point. And now you can see that I need that other point in order to be able to come up with my slope. So according to my change in y over my change in x, it says that from this point, I'm going to go down 3, because it's rise over run, and I'm going to go to the right 4. So from this point that I started, I'm going to count down 3. 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to go to the right 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now that I have those 2 points, I can of course take my ruler, draw my line through those 2 points, making sure that my line goes all the way past my graph and I have arrows on both ends. So now that I've got my second point, I can now fill in my unknown. So looking at this point right here, I've gone to the right 4 and I've gone down 5. So to the right 4 and down 5. So now I'm where I was yesterday, on Friday, not yesterday, it was Sunday. I was here on Friday. We now have my different points. So here is my x and here is my y. And if you remember, we had to make sure that we identified them as x1 and x2, y1 and y2. So we're going to go ahead and do our slope formula. And our slope formula tells us to do y2 minus y1, which is my rise. So here I see I have -5 minus a -2. Then when I go to do my run, I have x2 minus x1, which is going to be 4 minus 0. So when I go to solve these, I see here that I have 5 minus a -2, so I see I have that double negative, and they have to turn positive. So a -5 and a +2 is going to be equal to a -3. A 4 minus a 0 is going to be equal to 4. And if we notice, when I look here and I see that I have my rate of change, my change in y, over my change in x being -3/4, I can also see that when I found those 2 points, I ended up with the exact same slope, -3/4. So we're going to try that again with f. So I look and see I've got no points plotted, and I see that I do have a rate of change of 5 though. But that's strange, because where does that 5 go? Is that going to be my rise or my run? So this is where we have to stop and we have to think, what does that mean, the number 5? How can I turn the number 5 into a fraction? Well, we've learned that if I take that 5 and I put that over 1, it is exactly the same. 5 divided by 1 is going to be 5. So now that I know that my change in y is 5 and my change in x is 1, I can now plot that first point and determine what my second point is going to be, and then go ahead and find my slope. So I'm going to plot my very first point, which is -1, -7. I know that this is my x, and my -7 is my y. So I go to plot them, remembering that when we plot our x values, that's telling us to go left or right, and our y values are telling us to go up or down. The fact that this is a -1 now tells me I've got to go to the left 1. So I start at my origin, I go to the left 1, and then my 7 is negative, so I have to go down 7 and put a point. So now we've got to go back and look at my rate of change. My rate of change was 5. So my rise is 5 and my run is 1. So from my point that I just plotted, I need to go up 5, because it's a positive 5, up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then to the right 1, because it is a positive 1. I have my 2 points. Grab my straight edge. Draw my line connecting my 2 points. And now I need to indicate what this point value was. Well, you can see I didn't go to the left or to the right, so that means it's 0. But I did go down 2, which makes that a -2. So now it's like what we did on Friday, where we're going to use our slope formula in order to determine our slope. But first I'm going to identify my point. This is my x, this is my y. And I'm going to indicate that this is my x1 and this is my x2, while this is my y1 and this is my y2. So remembering my slope formula is y2 minus y1. So -2 minus a -7. And my x2 minus my x1 would be 0 minus a -1. So now I'm going to go ahead and determine what the answer is on the top. So I have -2 minus a -7, which means those are my double negatives, so they become positive. -2 and a +7 will give me 5. 0 minus a -1, I have another set of double negatives, so now I have 0 plus 1, which gets me 5/1, which I can leave as 5/1, or I can do that as that whole number of 5. All right, so if you can flip over to the very next page, we're going to go ahead and start 2.3D, finding the slope of a line. Which we're going to actually learn. We're going to do a couple of these that we've done in the past, and then we're going to learn how to find that slope of a line from a table. So a lot of this should just be review, kind of putting these all together. So calculating the slope of a line from a graph, this is where we're going to, see if I can get this on. I'm actually in Mrs. Zurzo's room right now, using her awesome camera. All right, here we go. So I'm going to look for those 2 points. And if you remember what we did in the past, when we were looking at a graph, we look at our graph reading from left to right. So I always look to find the furthest point to the left. And I see that right here, and I'm going to highlight that, so I know where my starting point is. And remember, we talked about rise over run. So I need to make sure that I go up or down first. So I look here to see, in order to get from this point to this point, am I going to go up or down? Well, I see I have to go up. And then I go ahead and I make that right triangle. And then I need to determine how far up I went and how far to the right I went. So I can see that I went up 5. And I went to the right 3. So when I go to set up my slope, it's my rise over my run, which is 5/3. And I look at that to see if it can be simplified. It cannot, so I leave the answer like it is. Let's move to my second one. And what I would like you to do at this point is pause the video, give B a try, and then after you've attempted it, then come back and check and see what your answer is. So pause the video now. All right, welcome back. So now what we're going to do, and what you should have done, is you should have found the point that was the furthest to the left, which I see is right here. And then I look to see from this point down to this point that I had to go down. And I see that I went down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I went down 5, so -5, and I went to the right 1. So when I go to set up my slope, it is my rise over my run. So my -5 over my 1, which I can leave like that because I cannot simplify it any further, or I can write it as -5. Both of those are acceptable answers for slope. All right, so now that we've mastered finding slope from a graph, we're going to go ahead and continue to work on finding slope from a set of points. So just like we did on our homework on Friday, we're going to make sure that we label our points. Here's my x1, here's my x2. Here is my y1, here is my y2. And I'm going to use that slope formula. So sometimes what I always like to do is I make sure that I write that slope formula on the top of my homework, on top of the paper that I'm working on, so that I can always refer back to it. So over here right next to the directions, I'm going to write that slope formula. M equals y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. So now I have it just to make sure that I can refer back to it if I need it. All right, so now let's work on A. So A says that M, or my slope, is going to be equal to y2, which is my 4, minus my y1, which is a -6. x2 is -5 minus my x1, which is 10. So I see that I have a double negative, so those become positive. So I have 4 plus 6 is going to equal 10. Then I have -5 minus 10, which is going to give me -15. I'm going to look to see if there's any way that I can simplify this. I see that 5 will go into both of them. So 10 divided by 5 gives me 2. -15 divided by 5 gives me -3. So this is my final answer. All right, let's hop over to B. So same thing that I've done in the past. I'm going to label my points. This is going to be my x1. This is going to be my x2. Here is my y1. Here is my y2. All right, so my formula is to do y2 minus y1. So y2 is 0 minus my y1, which is 3. My x2 is -3 minus my x1, which is 7. So now I'm going to go through and solve them. 0 minus 3 gives me -3. -3 minus 7 gives me -10. I look to see if anything can go into 3 and 10. And there is nothing that will make these two numbers smaller. However, I notice that I have a -3 and a -10. And we have learned that a negative divided by a negative would be a positive. So I need to make sure that I change those into positive and I write that my final answer is 3 tenths. Because a -1 will go into both of them. All right, similar to what we did before, I'm going to have you go ahead and pause the video for a second and give C a try. And then once you've attempted it, come on back and then restart the video so then that way you can check to see if you have the same answer. All right, let's go ahead and get started on C and we can check C. So here I label my points, x1, x2, y1, y2. So I'm going to start to be able to find my slope. So my y2 is going to be 0 minus 4. My x2 minus my x1 is going to give me 1 minus 0. Let me figure out this is where this camera here. Oh, I just did it worse. All right, here we go. That's better. All right, so now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and solve it and simplify it. So 0 minus 4 is -4. 1 minus 0 is 1. I can look to see there's nothing that can go into both my -4 and my 1 to make it smaller, so I can leave it like that, or I can set it equal to -4. Both of those are acceptable answers. All right, so now I also want you to go ahead and give D a try. Just pause the video, attempt D, When you are done, come back and restart the video and check to see if you got the same answer that I did. All right, here we go. So we're going to solve for a slope, and I'm going to label my points x1, x2, y1, y2. So my formula for slope is y2 minus y1. So negative 2 minus 1. x2, my run is x2 minus x1. So negative 5 minus a negative 5. So negative 2 minus 3 is going to be negative 3. I see on my run on the bottom that I see that I have a double negative. So then I notice that negative 5 plus 5 is equal to 0. Well, we have learned that we cannot divide anything by 0. So in fact, this slope is undefined. This would be a vertical line if we would see it on the graph. Be careful not to say that this has a slope of 0. This slope is undefined. It is a vertical line. It is not a horizontal line. All right, let's flip over to the next page. All right, so now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing on finding that rate of change and that slope from a table. So we've done rate of change on tables a lot in that first part of that unit. So that should be pretty easy for you. But what we're going to do is focus on using that slope formula that we just learned in order to find that from a table as well. So when we find the rate of change on a table, we look to see what is happening, what's my change in y, and if you remember, my rate of change is my change in y over my change in x. So we're going to stop and we're going to look to see where is that change in y and that change in x. So how did I go from 4 to 5? Well, I added 1. And I always like to check more than one point just to make sure that things are staying constant. So I'm going to look here and I'll check this point, this very next point, and how did I go from 5 to 6? Well, I added 1. So my change in y was 1. But then I have to go and I have to check those exact same points to try to find my change in x. So I look to see, well, how did I go from 3 to 4? I added 1. How did I go from 4 to 5? I added 1. So my change in x is 1. So 1 divided by 1 gives me the answer of 1. So my rate of change in this table is 1. So now I need to go and I need to check my slope. So how we check our slope is we have to pick two ordered pairs. Remember, my values in my table are an ordered pair. Here is my x value and my y value. So it really does not matter which set of ordered pairs that you pick. So I'm going to pick my first ordered pair right here. And I'm going to go pick my last ordered pair. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead, and what I prefer to do is I make sure that I write those ordered pairs down. I like being able to label my points to make sure that I am using the right ones because it's an easy way to make a mistake. So I see that I have an ordered pair of 3, 4, and I have an ordered pair of 6, 7 because those are the two ordered pairs that I chose. So I'm going to label them. Here is my x1, here is my x2, here is my y1, here is my y2. Now I'm going to start to solve for slope. So again, my formula is y2, 7, minus my y1, which is 4. And then my run is my x2 minus my x1, which is going to be 6 minus 3. 7 minus 4 gets me 3. 6 minus 3 gets me 3. And then I look to see how I can simplify that. And 3 divided by 3 is 1. So what did we notice about my rate of change and my slope? Yep, we should have noticed these are exactly the same. They should be exactly the same. So that's what we're going to see if this works for both B and C, if my rate of change will be the same as well as my slope. So let's hop down to B. So again, we're going to look for my rate of change. Doesn't matter which points you use. I'll use this one right here. how did I go from 14 to 9? How did I go from 14 to 9? Well, I subtracted 5. How did I go from 9 to 4? I subtracted 5. So remember, in order to find that rate of change, that change in y over the change in x, I see that my change in y is a negative 5. And I expect to see that when you do this on your homework, I need to see that you are showing me that you've checked more than one point on your table by using your little carets and telling me what is that change. So now I'm going to focus on my change in x. So I'm going to use those exact same points and I'm going to look to see how did I go from 1 to 2? I added 1. How did I go from 2 to 3? Well, I added 1. So my change in x was 1. So I stopped to look to see if I can simplify that. Nothing goes into either one of them other than 1. I can leave it as a fraction, or I can say negative 5 divided by 1 is negative 5. That is my rate of change. So yet again, I'm going to pick any 2 points that I want. It really does not matter. Last time I picked the first and the last. This time I'll pick my 2 middle points. I'm going to pick this point right here, and I'll pick this point right here. So in order to label my points, I'm going to make sure that I write those ordered pairs so I can label them. So I have an ordered pair of 1 and 14, and then I have an ordered pair of 2 and 9. So I'm going to label them. Here is my x1, here is my x2. Here is my y1, here is my y2. So now I'm going to do that slope formula. y2 minus y1, 9 minus 14. Then I have to do x2 minus x1, 2 minus 1. 9 minus 14 is negative 5. 2 minus 1 is 1. Again, I can leave it like this, or I can go ahead and solve negative 5 divided by 1, which is just going to be my negative 5. So yet again, we can see that both my rate of change and my slope are exactly the same. So now I would like you to go ahead and complete letter C with finding the rate of change. Make sure you're indicating to me where you found that rate of change on the table, and then using your slope formula in order to come up with the slope. So pause the video, give C a try, and then replay the video to check to see if you got the same answer that I did. All right, let's find that rate of change. So I'm going to pick, I'm going to be adventurous. I'm going to pick from this point to this point. And I'm going to check to see how did I go from 4 to 20. Well, I see I added 16. So of course I've got to go ahead and I have to check another point. So this time I'm going to check this point right here. And I'm going to go 12 to 28. Since I skipped, I'm going to go ahead and skip 2 as well. So from 12 to 28, I also see that added 16. That's excellent. So let's check those same points. How did I go from 2 to 6? I added 4. And then how did I go from 4 to 8? I added 4. So when I go to figure out my rate of change, I see that my rate of change, or my change in y, is 16. And my change in x is 4. So 16 and 4 can be simplified to either 4 over 1, because 4 will go into both, or it can be simplified down to 4. So now it's time to find those slopes. So I'm going to go ahead and use the points. I will use my first point. And I'll use my third point this time. And if you use different points, that's okay. Just follow along and make sure you use the same steps that I use. So these points that I happened to choose were 2 and 4, and then 6 and 20. So label them x1, x2, y1, y2. So I'm going to go ahead and do my formula. y2 minus y1 20 minus 4. Then I have to do my x2 minus my x1. 6 minus 2. 20 minus 4 gets me 16. 6 minus 2 gets me 4. 16 divided by 4 gets me 4. So yet again I notice that both my rate of change and my slope were exactly the same. Once you have completed all of your guided notes, please bring your guided notes packet up to the substitute teacher, and he or she will check your notes and then give you your homework as long as they are completed.